I grew up a good portion of my life outside the great city of Chicago. And in that great city, anyone growing up between the 1960s and early 2000s will recall the institution that was the Bozo Show. Every morning, I would sit in front of the TV and watch the effervescent crimson-haired entertainer in the blue and red costume and his equally lovable sidekick, Cookie, with his blue pants, red checkered shirt, and trademarked long yellow tie. So popular was the show that there was a 2-year waiting list for tickets to attend a live taping of the show at the WGN studios. When I was in first grade, my mom somehow finagled some tickets, and my brother Tony, my best friend Trevor, and I got to get the day off of school to show for the taping. I remember the sense of awe upon entering the studio and realizing that it was much smaller than it looked on TV. We happened to have been lucky enough to be attending the taping for that year's St. Patrick's edition of the show. It was amazing. My brother, my friend, and I were lucky enough to end the show leading the Grand March. I was honored. Now I know some people will think, oh great, another clown story. This is where you'd be wrong. Bozo was the least frightening clown you'd ever meet, and Cookie was hilarious. It's the magician you have to watch out for. When they brought in some local girls to demonstrate an Irish sword dance, my bladder decided it was the perfect time for me to find a bathroom. And I was given directions to the boys' room by one of the production crew towards the rear of the audience area. I made my way down the labyrinthine corridors of the WGN complex until I saw a small sign beside an otherwise unmarked door that read men, and did my business. On the way back to the studio, I took a wrong turn somewhere and ended up in the hallway with doors marked with just first names. There were Bob, who I would later learn was Bob Bell, who played Bozo at the time. Roy was Roy Brown, who played Cookie. There was a door marked Band, with a trio that played the show's music. A remnant of Bob Trendler's Big Top Band stored their gear. And finally, Marshall Brodian, started making guest appearances on the Bozo Show in 1968 as a magician, and later returned under the name Wizzo, the Wizard, dressed like something out of Arabian Nights, and claiming to be from the far-flung Arabia. He claimed his power came from the stone of Zanzibar, which he wore around his neck. I never found him particularly entertaining, myself, but other kids loved him. He gave me the creeps with his manic expressions and doody-doody-doo catchphrase. I always thought there was something wrong about the guy. I know at this point, I'm not where I should be, and I should try to find an adult to usher me back to the studio to watch the rest of the taping of the show. And that's what I was here for, after all, not to snoop around the hallways. I turned myself around and was about to head off in search of either a map, an adult, or both, when I heard a creak behind me, followed by a voice. "Hello, young man. Lost, are we?" I turned around, expecting to see a frowning security guard. Instead, was staring into the smiling, wide-eyed visage of the wizard himself. Yes, sir," I muttered. "You seemed bigger in real life, filling almost the entire doorway." He was casually leaning in. "I'll get someone to show you the way momentarily." He stood aside and bowed deeply, as if he were an Ottoman royal welcoming a foreign dignitary. I reluctantly entered the dressing room, which, instead of looking like a dressing room you've seen on TV, looked like the inside of a gypsy tent. Rich fabrics hung from the dark walls, as did a smell I didn't recognize, cloying and sweet, like burning maple syrup, potpourri. "You know my name, boy. What is yours?" he asked as he walked across the deep rugs covering the floor. "Nick," was all I could manage. There was a thick smoke in the air that I attributed to the smell. My parents smoked cigarettes at the time, and this most certainly did not smell like that. He turned and dropped himself into a chair of sorts that reminded me of my cousin's beanbag. He snapped up a tube and sucked from one end of it, blowing the smoke in my direction. I coughed, feeling lightheaded. Could you call someone? Like you said. He blew more smoke in my direction. This time it wasn't sweet, it was sulfurous. "Do you like magic, Nick?" He blinked, then, slow and deliberate, his irises had taken on a yellowish hue, and something even more unexpected happened. His amulet blinked, like a large cat's eye. It blinked and flashed, like there were flames within. It leaned closer to me, with without my noticing, and it reached a hand. No, not a hand, a tentacle towards me. It wrapped around my wrist, and he stared at me with those intense eyes. No, I don't like magic. It came out way steadier than I thought it would. Wizzo's smile faltered a bit, and he dropped my wrist. It's a shame. Non-believers are so unappealing. Something seemed to snap, and he just looked like his old self again. He stood and brushed himself off, walking towards the door. It swung open, and he pointed down the way I'd came. Take a left there, and the next 2 rights. Then just keep walking. You'll run into Studio 1. Enjoy the show, kid. I turned around, the end of the hall, but he was gone. I quickly made my way back to the studio and found my seat between Tony and Trevor. Geez, Nick, did you take a dump or something? You missed most of the show. I told him I had to avoid uncomfortable questions. The rest of the day went without incident. I never told my family about it. I never thought about it until years later. My uncle had the good fortune to become the newest musical director personality for the show. He always spoke well of the other cast members, and we were invited to the show taping when I was in high school. It seemed silly to be there again as a teenager, but it was fun. After the show, when the rest of the audience had left, my uncle invited us to meet the other actors. By this time, Bob Bell had retired, replaced by Joey and Arya, who played the role until the show stopped recording in 2001. They were all very nice, jovial people, and then he introduced me to Marshall Brodian, out of makeup. He's just a normal guy. I told him I'd met him once before and mentioned the approximate date. He kind of frowned and said, I'm not sure that's right. I hadn't been on very many shows that season. I believe my wife and I were traveling. I'm not sure what to believe. I just stick with what I decided on that day. I meant what I claimed to be Wizzo the Wizard. Never trust a magician.